Yeah, good day, my beautiful people. You're listening to Independent TV 7. Now, straight to the headlines. Now, on the headline, we have today TINUBU wants, and the subheaded says that the world will ignore Nigeria at its own peril. At its own peril. The news in full. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu on Wednesday in New York said the continent will no longer accept human rights advocacy by wealthy and powerful nations to stop developing economies from dealing decisively with actors who illicitly siphon and smuggle out the continent's vast mineral resources. This is coming from Tinubu. I don't know. Tinubu is preaching, is advocating or trying to admonish and to tell the people of Nigerians or the politicians or the political pedagogue or the oil bunkers or the embezzlers. Now he's coming out to say and tell us that President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, said on Wednesday, according to him in New York, that the continent will no longer accept human rights advocacy by wealthy and powerful nations to stop developing economies from dealing decisively with actors who illicitly siphon and smuggle out the continent's vast mineral resources. The president stated this while meeting with United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres at his United Nations UN headquarters, adding that the world will ignore Nigeria at its own peril. Tinubu asserted that African nations will now take decisive actions to stop Western nations from hiding under such disguise under human rights while smuggling in Western-made weapons, which enrich the wealthiest economies in the world at large and the parasitic expense of African stability and wealth creation. We are facing the great challenge of scavengers ravaging our lands and oppressing our people on illegal mines, taking our gold and mineral wealth back to develop countries' economies by stealth and violence against Nigerians. Where once human rights ends, the right of another begins. That is what Tinubu said, according to him. Now, Tinubu said, most especially and specifically for self protection, if we fight the battle, they say human rights, yes, quote in, quote out, but we will now be aggressive, and we, in the other hand, will question motives. We will stop what is happening in our land. We require your effective collaboration. Now, on this note, let's digress a little because I saw in one article earlier today that Ghana, as itself, Ghana 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 must go, that we all know as Ghana, that we they give life. Ghana is now proposing to give Nigeria life or sell life to Nigeria as an electricity. That's what I mean, because we derive that those things, exchange of electricity, either through money, trade by barter or thereabout, from Kanji Dam. Now, Nigeria has been said that Nigeria was the giant of Africa. We supply Chad, Cameroon, Niger, likes like Ghana, we supply them light. And I could remember during the old times, they used to say Nigeria is the giant of Africa in the area of peacekeeping, because the battalion we have as soldiers in the army, they go for rescue, peacekeeping, either in Sudan, Somalia, to keep peace in such of country like theirs. But in our own case, Nigeria has deteriorated to that level whereby things no longer work fine. Mineral resources zero, natural resources zero, which we are blessed with. And if you talk about foreign reserve, local reserve zero. Even a country that has zero balance as an account or minus zero is a bad debt. Now, Tinubu, on the other hand, is advising us, because I believe he's an economist and he knows what it is. But Nigeria is a contracted land, or a contraption, according to Donald Trump. Well, not to waste much of our time, let's move further. The Nigerian leader noted that the United Nations must transform from being one of the world's famous or foremost talk shop to discuss global issues into becoming the world's foremost action coordinated center, saying that a situation in which 70% of the resources being devoted to the world's poorest countries are being spent and sent back out on overheads and administrative costs. which also will defeat the purpose and objectives of the organization where help is needed most. Now, the poverty ravaging our continent and the question of security and counter-terrorism requires us to work in close and effective synergy. If we engage in talk shop as real challenges wreak real havoc in real time, we will fail. The time to strike is now. The time to achieve real results is now. I fought for democracy. I was detained for democracy. Now I am a president, and I am determined to prove that democracy can provide the development that our nation and our continent so urgently demands. Again, he says, I am now the president, and I am determined, or determined according to what they will say, determined to prove that democracy can provide the development that our nation and our continent so urgently demands. Now, trace those of us here through our foundations, and you will find out that we have ties and links with poverty. Oh my God. We must not be ashamed of that history. The historical part is just the history, but poverty is unacceptable. I am one of the lucky survivors of gripping poverty. Oh, there is this slogan that is, ravaging, rampant and every other thing. It's like a rumor, but not rumor, but it has been said by TINUBU that Emilókàñ, the Emilókàñ syndrome has really, really, eaten deep into TINUBU's vein to the extent that he brags and he has a go towards saying things that he's saying. But I believe God in his stance, is by him. That's why. On this note, he's still saying, trace those of us here to our foundations, according to TINUBU. He said, and you will find that we have ties and links with poverty. That means it's telling us that Nigeria, we are impoverished in nature. So we have ties with not even progress, not success. He's talking about poverty. Now it's standing to be corrected and to say vividly the way it is. And as it is, he's very sure about what he's saying. Now he said, we must not be ashamed of that historical part, which is the history, but poverty is unacceptable. And he said again by saying, I am one of the lucky survivors of a gripping poverty. To God be the glory. Well, Nigeria is truly a giant. Like I said earlier, it's 240 million people and counting with a massive youth population. We are done saying too much. We seek such action. 1. We have a rising out of poverty as individuals, but until our people have risen out of that, we will not rest. Even if it requires decisions at home that make me temporarily unpopular, the president affirmed. Now, in response, the United Nations Secretary General emphasized that the United Nations system is in the process of real reform that will largely address some of the institutional frailties, whichever way, and lack of decision making power for the developing countries or world, on whose behalf more than 75% of the United Nations resources are accrued. We now recognize that the need to reform the institution to represent the world as it is today. Now, the question is of debt and SDR. The fact is that middle-income countries have only marginal access to concessional funding. In the SDGs summit, we believe we have a growing political consensus and now a declaration. In this regard, we are pursuing this with great determination, which is the United Nations Secretary General said. The United Nations Secretary General further assured President TINUBU of the fullest support of the United Nations system for ECOWAS Economic Community of West African States in light of the series of military coups that have occurred in the West African sub-region in the past few months and years, which Mr. President has said. Accordingly, we have high expectations for your presidency after the many bold steps you have taken. Nigeria is an indispensable voice in the sub-region, which we will give you every support needed for your success to be achieved. In other words, your success is Africa's success, and we wish you well, the United Nations leader concluded. Wow. Nigeria, we are bound or bent, I don't really know, because according to TINUBU now, he said we have ties with poverty. That means impoverishness has really eaten deep into Nigerians, but he now is claiming that he is the survivor of that syndrome. But Emilókàñ syndrome, TINUBU syndrome, Bola Ahmed TINUBU syndrome, and every other thing as per his own saying yes, is the oracle, is the Emilókàñ, is the next in line. Everything is still on God. Well, we don't have much time to mince word and all that. I believe this way we're going to draw the curtain. I would like you to share your views in the comment section, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Independent TV 7. Thanks for listening, and God bless you.